All right, thank you very much. Welcome everyone. I'm glad you're spending your Friday afternoon with me. That's great. So I hope I make this worthwhile. We are a small group, so I think we're a little bit flexible to see where we go and maybe then answer more specific or discuss more specific topics. I prepared a few different points today, and I think we can decide on how much time we want to spend on what. I have an input part about the ideas behind, about the research that we're doing, and some case studies where we try to bring these practices into implementation, so mainly case studies from Switzerland and from Singapore. Then afterwards I'd like to do a little research with you. We are always interested how stakeholders perceive these topics and how they work themselves with these type of techniques, if they work. If they don't work, what they would expect from these techniques. So I have a little interactive survey I would like to give to you, and maybe each one probably brought their mobile phone, so it's something we can do in 5 minutes together, and then we can look a little bit at the results. Then we might have a short break, depending on your fatigue and level of attention. And then afterwards, the second part, I'd like to dive a little deeper in this framework that we're developing since 8 years, with which we're trying to access these type of questions in practice, in research. It's our workhorse, most of the projects, and also yesterday at the Congress there were quite a number of presentations that use this framework in the background because it just provides a very good base layer to build on. I'd like to talk a little bit about good modeling practice. I assume most of you are not modelers, so just a little bit what is behind modeling, why we even model, what we should consider when modeling. Yesterday I've seen presentations where people, for example, presented numbers with 4 digits after the comma and assuming and knowing that everything we model is highly, highly uncertain and has a lot of assumptions behind it. It's a little funny to see these type of numbers. So we want to talk a little bit about that. I want to walk through and present to you a little bit the CA as a city energy analyst, as a modeling framework. My idea was to do a little walkthrough, open the tool, show you a little bit how this works to get you for a look and feel. But you can also, we have it now on the cloud. I will also supply the link where you can explore yourself a little bit. Probably not run simulations, but look a little bit at the inputs and also at the visualization. Depends if you only have a phone, that might be a little bit difficult because it's going to be very small. But if you brought your laptop, you might have the chance. It's something brand new. We just have this since roughly a month. We have it on the cloud, but this is the way we're trying to go. Obviously, not to download too much. You can, of course, all download it. It's open source. Just have to warn you, it takes some megabytes to download it at the end. And afterwards, if we make it all the way through, the last thing I would like to do with you is a little game. I Wish, I Wonder. This is a little Miro board I prepared where I'd like to catch your feedback on things you think are interesting or you like. Other stuff you think, okay, I wish I had this in my work or on this type of tool sets. And then maybe something you're curious about. Depends on how we go through, how much time we take for everything. But let's kick this off. Like I said, I don't want to talk all the time, so here's a little super quick questionnaire which you can answer 3 very simple questions just to get us started on the topic and also to know a little bit about your interests. This is the first time I use it, so I hope this is working. Otherwise we are small enough to actually talk about this in person. Okay, you're probably navigating through all the questions. When we're finished, we can just quickly go through. Is that accessible to everyone? Does it work? Good. All right. There should be 3 questions, yeah? Okay. All right, then I think this is how we have to do it. Yeah, if we have to go through, all right. So this, you all answered the first question, right? So how much carbon emissions do the top 100 emitting cities contribute to global carbon emissions? The majority of you, vast majority, tipped about 27. Actually, it's the 18, so it's a little less. But still, it's a lot, right? If you imagine 100 cities, if you would improve the situation in 100 cities, you would have a huge leverage on actually reducing carbon emissions. Okay, next question should be open now. What does UBEM stand for? Unified Benchmark, Urban Building Energy Modeling, Urban Behavioral Emission Model. Okay, probably everyone voted. Let's see how that works. All right, well, that was an easy one. Very good. Building energy modeling. Well, urban behavioral emission model could also be nice. Yeah, could also be nice. Very good. Majority. And now the final one. What interests you most regarding this workshop? Also to gauge a little bit your interests. I hope it's not everything is other, because then we have to talk about what we will be talking about. Okay, probably everyone voted. Let's see. We are well distributed. You had multiple answers, new methods, tools to decarbonize, UBEM modeling. Okay, we will do this a little shorter. Case studies, applications, future trends and research, how to innovate planning, decision making. Very good. So I think this should be covered in my presentation, but how to innovate planning and decision making maybe is something we can also bilaterally discuss. I think that would be very interesting for us also to learn. I mean, we are researchers, we are assuming a lot how you guys work, so that would definitely be helpful for us. Cool. Thank you very much for this first input. Let's go to the presentation. Okay. So the core topic is about integrating energy and emissions in urban design and decision making. Just a quick question, the last one, I promise, for at least 10 minutes. Who was yesterday at the symposium? Okay. Some people then have seen this slide already. As you can see, and this is a very interesting study I can recommend to all of you, researchers that looked into 106 cities and the carbon emissions related to those 106 cities. And of course, when we're thinking about these topics, we think, what is actually the contribution of buildings? And if we know that cities emit a lot of carbon emissions, we can also see that in most of those cities, the first three of those are actually building related, and you can see that a lot of those bars, those three elements actually constitute half or even more of that. So we can say, yes, reducing carbon emissions of buildings in cities is one big step towards decarbonizing cities. So it has a certain relevance to do that. There's interesting research, not too much. When I did this presentation, I was looking actually for success stories and case studies where cities actually reduced carbon emissions effectively. There is these type of studies. This is another study. It's limited to European cities, but it's 1,000 European cities. And a few things are quite interesting. First of all, the general gist of this research is, yes, most cities are on track. This is maybe not so easy to see. But the red ones is increasing emissions. The blue dots were actually cities that were able to reduce their carbon emissions. What did they focus on? And this is a little bit here to the left. This is based on a text search. So they looked through a lot of policy documents and looked for certain categories. And you can see here, actually you can't. Sorry, the resolution is rather low. But this is transport. This is residential, this is industry, and this is tertiary, so basically commercial and how would you say in English? Tertiary services, for example, offices. So if you look into those two, the tertiary and the building related, if you combine that, the residential, you get basically the building emissions. So also this depicts a similar story that it's mainly about buildings and transport. And if you can see furthermore in this study, we see that most of the policies are actually guided towards reducing building emissions, because that's one step we can actually do a lot already about. Oh, perfect. Now I'm getting a... Okay. And this is reflected also in policy making. I also showed this slide yesterday. I find this quite interesting. Also a very interesting report to read. Global Status Report on Renewables that kind of maps policy interventions to reduce building-related carbon emissions. And it's quite interesting to see here that it's actually a lot of policies involved that try not only to reduce, but to create and generate renewable power on buildings. This is what I mainly was focusing on yesterday, as you can see here, either through policies or financial and fiscal incentives to actually do that. It's very much on power, very much on renewable heating and cooling, or heating and cooling, and the flip side to it, the banning of fossil fuels in buildings. That is mainly, of course, in heating-related areas. You are using electricity anyway, because you have very little demand for heat, but in colder parts of the world, there's still a lot of fossil fuel heating systems. So we can see it's recognized, it's realized, and then the big question is, how can we do it? Let's see, does it work? Oh, it works, perfect. Thank you very much, that's great. I have both hands. So this is an example from Zurich, the city where I come from and where we work, similar to working with Singapore. We have a lot of working relations with the city of Zurich, where we closely collaborate and investigate how they're progressing in this. This is an example of one of the scenarios that starts in the past, where you can see over the past roughly 30 years, there's been a carbon reduction by 35%. And this is mainly on the reduction of use of fossil fuels, as you can see here. So fuel for transport, one big section, but then oil and natural gas, primarily related to building usages. So 35% in 30 years is not so bad, but it's also not a lot. If we extrapolate, right, we should be zero carbon in 2050, something like that. We should be significantly better. So it's clear the way we did it in the past doesn't work for the future. We have to get there faster and be more effective. And of course, city government is very much thinking, how can we actually achieve that? And I find this a very interesting chart. As you can see here, this is where we are basically at 2020, roughly 13 tons of CO2 equivalent per person. And this should go rapidly down to maybe 4 or 5, something like that. And then the areas where this is mainly to be reduced, again, you can see there's a big hope that we can do something with buildings. I highlighted all the building-related topics. One, for example, so direct energy use of buildings supposed to be zero, right? No more energy in buildings. Buildings' indirect energy use, so everything I get from power stations, from utility, is also to dramatically decrease, as you can see here. Then buildings of transport of material and infrastructure, 12. There, on the other hand, is not much reduction, right? So it's clearly that if you combine those bars to those bars, it's about the operational energy and emissions, so very much about how much is consumed in operating these type of buildings and transport. But on the construction side, on the actual material usage side, they're a little bit, I would say, conservative in estimating that there would be a potential to reduce. I think if we would do this today, this is already a few years old, I think this would look differently. We're very much also thinking of reducing carbon emissions related to building materials. That's one of the big topics. We've seen this also at the conference. But you can see it involves all the sectors, and buildings are definitely very much under pressure to change something. Unfortunately, you only see a little bit of this graph, but at least something. I also tried to highlight yesterday what makes this, you could question, okay, why do we need research for that? What's actually, why don't we just do this with some kind of interventions? And what we think is relevant and interesting and makes this a little bit complicated is the fact that it's connected across those different scales, as you can see here. This is also our rationale for developing these type of modeling tools, for example, starting with choices on the material level, very much what a material can also do in terms of performance. If you think about a solar material, for example, then going into the component where from a material you build basically, for example, a facade that is energy generating as well as reducing heat emissions, heat flows, for example. Then, of course, you need to integrate this into buildings. All those components then form buildings at the very end. And it's very much a question of interrelation between those different components and people, of course, how much energy is consumed, how much emissions are actually caused. And then you integrate these different buildings into neighborhoods. Yesterday at the FCL, the panel discussion we had, the discussion, is it about buildings or is it about districts? And it's very clear that a lot of interesting research and a lot of leverage is actually created in the larger scale, not in the building scale, but in the district scale. So the fact that we can connect different buildings and can use synergies and interactions between different buildings, that is, I think, a very promising avenue. And then the larger scale then, from the neighborhood into the city, of course, has other implications, for example, urban infrastructures, national grids, all those things also come in. So the tricky part, and this is maybe why we are still struggling to implement this, is that all those things are very much interconnected. They make what we call, at least a complicated system, sometimes even a complex system, by the way that we're not able to predict how things actually interact. And I think this requires that we rethink the way how we design, we plan, but also how we do the processes behind, because it needs to integrate a lot of those spatial scales and time scales into our thinking. So what makes modeling of this interesting is a city actually doesn't have like a discrete time horizon. If you think of a building, you can also always think there's a start date, then at the end there's an end date. This building will be torn down at a certain point in time. But cities actually always evolve, right? There's an infinite timeline. That's also something that it's really hard to wrap our heads around, that there's not specifically discrete points in time that we actually do this. We have all those interbuilding effects. If you look at a building, then you can easily calculate the HVAC, you can think about envelope performance. But if you think about buildings, there's a lot of effects in between buildings itself. It starts, of course, with wind flows, radiation, different types of shadowing and the energy transfer between buildings. That then creates specific climatic environments. You all know about microclimate, right? So doing something in the city climatically does something different than if we put this on the outside, on the open field. We have connection to large-scale infrastructures. That is very dominant if we think about investing in infrastructures for energy supply. In Singapore, it's very much about district cooling. However, if you build district cooling, it means that you, at least for 30 years, you're locked into a certain technology. So you need to have kind of projections how to deal with this in the future. There's a coupling of multiple domains. This is what makes it actually really interesting. We think about connecting transportation, mobility, as well as buildings, and especially if you think of this in terms of energy transition, using renewable energies, I tried to show this yesterday, there's very interesting options. But also if we think about cities and how we access certain things, then of course transportation makes a large difference to that. This is also a very tricky one. I can tell you from the city of Zurich, we talk with different departments of the city, but they all have different agendas, and it's not so easy to synchronize, because in the past cities have been planned more in different silos, and now we are in this challenge that those silos actually prevent that we can do new things, and changing the process and changing how stakeholders interact and work, that's one of the biggest challenges, I would say. So we can see what characterizes modeling cities is this high degree of interactions and high degree of interdependencies that we somehow need to capture in the tools that we work with, and this is the basis for our work, is thinking about processes and tools, how to improve that and how to make this more tangible. So what can we do from our perspective to reduce building carbon emissions? These are all extensive fields of research. It's actually quite interesting to follow. There's also certain trends. This started maybe 10, 15 years ago. There was a lot of hope that urban form would actually change, have a big impact on building energy and building emissions. And this, I think, has been exhausted to a certain degree. We know kind of how urban form influences certain energy demands, only some, but not all of them. This is on the sector of reducing demand. The first act would, of course, be, okay, let's use less. What are basically our leverages to use less? So urban form is one of them. Building controls is then more on the system side. That's a very low-hanging fruit, and there we can see a lot of research going into data-driven techniques. We harness a lot of data in buildings, so it means we can also use this data. And for me personally, we had a big discussion in Switzerland about the Ukraine war, which created this type of energy shortage. And still, I was wondering, there was a lot of debate about, yeah, we need new power stations, new power plants, we have to think about nuclear, all these different things. But the lowest hanging fruit was absolutely not utilized, and it's just reduce and use less, right? And in a lot of buildings also, example in my hotel here in Singapore, there's this, this nice slot where you put your card in, and if you take this card out, your entire room gets switched out, right? So the cleaning ladies in my hotel room, they put a new card in all the time, every time they're in there, and then this whole system just runs until I'm there in the evening, right? So they're basically bypassing this actually nice effect that you would try to reduce. And this is what we do everywhere, right? For convenience, we bypass these type of systems. I personally I see that it's extremely underutilized, the fact that with better controls and more smarter controls, we can actually shave off a huge amount of consumption. This is a very interesting field of research. My colleague and former PhD, Clayton Miller, here in Singapore is doing a lot of work on that. That is connected. If we want to control better, of course, the question is, how do we cater better to the needs of us as people? So the whole idea of making this occupant-centric, so a building better understands what we work on, what we would like to have. We did a case study here in Singapore where we let the building learn how the occupants were using the building, as well as what preferences they would have. Some like their office warmer, some like it colder. And actually also at the workshop, BCA is testing certain principles of personalized cooling, for example, where you can adjust. So there's an interesting development in this direction. Then, of course, envelope construction retrofit. This is the basic stuff we know, of course, the conventional stuff. Then the second aim would be substituting supply. As mentioned, replacing fossil fuel-based energy sources by renewable energy sources on a large scale as well as on the small scale. So replacement, for example, through solar. District heating and cooling system, that is not a supply system as such, but it has the potential to increase the efficiency and provide more cooling or more heating with less input than at the very end. And yeah, solar energy production I already mentioned on buildings' facades. And then this is probably one of the most interesting parts where also a lot of research is going in. Jidong Kang yesterday presented part of the research we do at the Future Cities Lab. It's the question how we actually better manage those energy flows, right? So peak shaving, demand response, basically the principle behind here is that we try to better balance out an energy grid across different usages, and by just doing that, and he showed a very nice case that, for example, if you combine buildings to energy communities, you can actually shave off the demand because there's better synergies and better utilization of certain energy sources. Same as heat cascading, where you say, well, I'm producing heat for one building, and then the lower temperatures I use in a different building. Same works with cooling, for example, connecting this at the very end. And then increasing self-consumption of renewables, that's, of course, something that falls into the first category. So the question, when I generate, how much can I actually utilize myself? It's also very interesting that when we came to Singapore, we learned that here the idea is actually a different one. So in Switzerland, we have a big difference between the feed-in tariff, the money you get when you feed in renewable energy, and the money you have to pay when you actually buy a kilowatt hour. And that makes it most economical to actually utilize renewable energies the most by yourself. So the more energy you use for yourself, the better for your money, for your bank account, that is, right? That means you get incentivized to invest in storage, in demand response, peak shaving, all those different things. If the money you get from feeding in is the same as you pay for the kilowatt hours, then there's no incentive of self-utilization, because you can always feed to the grid. So for example, in Singapore, we learned that there's a big interest of actually feeding in renewable energy into the grid. So there's actually almost the same. I think it's only 15 or 20% cut off from the feed-in, which makes it interesting if you produce renewables to actually sell it to the grid rather than maximize self-utilization. So you can see there's a lot of economic boundaries and a lot of economic parameters in this equation then at the end. So all those are interesting measures, and it very much depends on the local context which one of those measures can actually have the biggest traction, I would say. All right, let's dig a little bit into different case studies that we did to kind of exemplify this thinking. One we did in the Future Cities Lab 2, the Tanjong Pagar area. It's actually, you can see it from here, and the case study there was the idea of expanding the central business district into this harbor area. I think this is still a plan that is pursued, but it's very long term, right? And of course, that's for us, that was a very interesting opportunity because we usually don't get to build these large parts of cities in Europe. And we collaborated with a quite interdisciplinary group. There was urban designers, for example, Kees Christianse, who was an urban master planner. There was urban economics, there was transportation, and there was us from the energy perspective. And now the interesting question here, and that's probably what you face if you're an urban planner, urban designer on a daily basis, is how do you design something, how do you make something energy efficient that is not there yet, right? We had this funny chicken and egg problem that the urban designers always asked us, what are your parameters? What do you need for energy efficiency so we can design something? We always said, well, you need to at least give us something so we can calculate energy efficiency because we cannot just calculate out of thin air. So we did this a while back and forth. At some point it was quite clear, okay, this is not how we can progress. So in our module, we developed a methodology how to extrapolate from the past into the future, right? So you could say a new city, a new part of Singapore is somewhat like the old part or an older part of Singapore, right? That's an hypothesis. So what our PhD student Zhong Ming then did, he was actually looking at 14 new towns in Singapore and extrapolated the urban design parameters basically that built this new town, and he then grouped this, categorized this very nicely into different blocks and block dimensions to build kind of like a vocabulary of the past Singapore to think a little bit how the future Singapore could look like, right? And doing this then ended up in a set of building patterns, right? If you zoom in then on those different blocks, which kind of give you the dimensions, and then you look into the building patterns, you can actually, distinguish this into a grammar. And from this grammar, you can then start building typical blocks and typical building patterns from this. And he came up with an array, I think at the end it was 13 building patterns he then utilized, and then this is the first time when then software comes in. So for example, by generating typical urban blocks, and this is what has been done here, then you use this as a grammar basically to build up urban blocks, and then it's quite interesting to see that they look quite similar to existing urban blocks. But here then you are in the situation that you can start thinking about energy performance and how you would actually simulate and how you would improve the energy performance of that. And this is then the result basically down here, where you can immediately look at the different block topologies and see what would be the potential solar energy penetration you could achieve from that, and what would be the costs involved to that. So you have an immediate source where you can do analysis from, right? And I guess this is what we're trying to do, immediately getting a basis to run analysis. And then this I also showed yesterday. It's still something which exemplifies, I think, quite nice, this type of interrelation. So these are the electricity grids of Southeast Asian countries next to Singapore, which is down here, and then you see it's getting higher. The highest one is Indonesia. And now you could speculate, how do you create electricity for a building? How do you use it, and what would be the most low emission way to do that? Now you can say, okay, well, I have a certain irradiation that hits my building surface, which is down here, which is between 0 and 1200, that's kind of the max. And now if I would use a photovoltaic module to generate electricity over a life cycle of 25 years, what would be the carbon footprint of this kilowatt hour? Then if you do this according to the irradiation, you get this curve, and you can basically see the intersections of this curve with these grid lines basically show you what is the irradiation where a photovoltaic module on a building facade or a building envelope would still be more ecological as if I would take the electricity from the grid. And you can see that for very emitting countries, emitting countries, so like Indonesia, almost anywhere on a building, a photovoltaic module would end up in less carbon emissions over the life cycle than if I would take it from the grid. If I do this in Switzerland, for example, I need to have pretty good irradiation to do that because the power grid has actually been quite decarbonized already. If I do this for Singapore, I still get a very interesting area, and for those of you that do solar simulations, 200 kilowatt hours per square meter in a year, that's not a lot. These are east, west facades, for example. This is, of course, the rooftop. And then if you know that, you can look, again, you take those block typologies that have been created, and now you can plant those block typologies with the amount of solar cells in this irradiation threshold. So basically, you can put solar modules on this block only where it's ecologically more beneficial than if I would take it from the grid. And then you can see, depending on the location, of course, that gives you a certain percentage of emission reduction just by solar. As you can see here, it depends, of course. Indonesia, here it's Malaysia, you actually have quite a huge share that you can carve off. In Singapore, even in those very, very high-rise block typologies, you're still somewhat between 5 and 15% that you can reduce carbon emissions if you would generate your own electricity on your building and your building facades. And then it's interesting what this means in terms of envelopes. It's really, sorry, the colors are not so good, but you can see that depending on the location, that means actually a large fraction of your building envelope is utilized for solar generation. Essentially this means that in future, in these contexts, if the grids stay at that level, you'd better make entire solar PV facades instead of taking this from the grid. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. This is a really interesting study, and I'm very intimately knowledgeable about this part.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to understand. So the graph on the left, you're saying where the intersection of the curve and say the low voltage electricity in Singapore, if the solar radiance is a minimum of 200 kilowatt hours, so on, then you're saying that when it's that or higher, it's better off to put a BIPV to reduce the carbon emission.
Yes. So over the life cycle, you would end up with less carbon emissions, total carbon emissions, sorry, if you would have an irradiation higher than this intersection.
And
right?
This is irrespective of when a building developer looks at BIPV, they typically try to look at the ROI coming back to them.
Economics is not in this equation.
It's irrespective of that.
Yes, exactly.
And then on the top right, where you have block typology and the maximum operational carbon emission reduction based on the different vernacular urban block forms that the researcher had documented, you're saying that different block typologies may benefit more to have more BIPV facade covering the building than other typologies. But it's generally pretty high. Like it's not saying only like 10% of the facade. Some can be as high as 50%.
Right, but
irrespective of the economics.
Exactly, but the interesting fact there is, if you look at the block typology that scores really high, this is a kind of a medium or low rise building, right, which has a smaller volume but larger roof surfaces, for example.
Okay, so this is the caveat is that bear in mind it's like either like low or medium size, but not the giant high-rise buildings like Waffle Tower.
Exactly. So basically, it just shows the fraction you would be able to mitigate in terms of your carbon emissions. And of course, if you have a very compact building and a high roof area, then you're able to generate more and you have less energy consumption and emissions because you don't have that much floor area.
Is the carbon emission intensity only related to the BIPV building material or?
Only BIPV. This is only reduced to BIPV. So it's the full life cycle of a BIPV module from creation, manufacturing to operation. So it doesn't take into account the full building life cycle, which would make this even more dramatic because in a low-rise building you tend to have a better embodied carbon emission percentage as in high-rise buildings because you don't use a lot of structural reinforcements, elevator shafts, all these things tend to be smaller in low-rise buildings.
It's even irrespective of all the cabling to the BIPV.
This is the BIPV module, so it doesn't integrate. But you could say there is a certain fraction you would need to spend on inverters and cabling and all this, but here it's right, it's just a module. If you look at the carbon life cycle of a BIPV module, it's actually the biggest share is the solar cell. So 60 to 70% is the type of solar cell that you choose. The next one is if it's glass cover or glass, and only at the very end it's the other electronic components actually.
When you look at the BIPV module, you're only looking at crystalline cells, the monocrystalline and the multi.
Yep. So there you see it, there's there's a multi-crystalline, monocrystalline, and then you see it's a little distinguishing between mounted and integrated, so you have a little higher efforts for integration than for mounting. If you would add now thin film, for example, CDTE or CIGS, this would even look even different.
It doesn't even include like amorphous silicon either.
No, this is just the reason why, because this is 95% of solar modules. Yeah. So, I mean, this would look dramatically different if we take CDTE or CIGS, for example, because then, of course, the embodied carbon is much, much lower on thin film, right? So, thin film cells have just a fraction of the embodied carbon as compared to silicon solar cells. And then you would even say, well, you can literally put it everywhere. But we're not talking about the economics, right?
But I can see that BIPV manufacturers, if they knew this knowledge, they would try to include it in the economic pitch to developers.
Yeah. No, they would, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here at FCL Global, is to look at this not only from the energy perspective, but also from the economics perspective. And it's really interesting to see that, for example, for rooftop solar, there's a really successful model in Singapore now. Everyone's happy. It's actually a model which is a win-win-win situation, especially with HDB. So everyone's really likes that, and it totally fulfills the needs, and it's booming, which leads to the fact that rooftops, there's not so much capacity. But we haven't found this model yet for building facades, for example, right? And there's a qualitative difference in facades to the simple fact that you can always put something on the rooftop. It's very much detached, but if you do this on the building facade, a lot of other building-related questions come in, fire safety, all this stuff. So, but I'm willing to bet a considerable amount that in 5 to 6 years this will be solved, and there will be an economic model how to integrate solar PV in building facades, and a lot of people will be happy about this. I'm pretty sure. Just because it's logical, right? This is the way you have to go, because rooftops are limited and facades are plenty, and we can show that with dropping carbon emissions and dropping prices of solar modules, even non-optimal areas will be interesting for BIPV placement. All right, and then, of course, we always think, how could, by the way, if you have questions to any of that, feel free, right? I mean, I think we are small enough to have interactive discussions. So if we look into these type of decision-making tools, this is, again, what was one of the outcome of Zhongming's work, is providing like dashboards where you can say, well, actually, I have different parameters of urban design and of energy systems that help me to identify which one of the solutions might be most interesting. And there you can see there's even like a shop house typology, but other typologies in there. And then dependent on where my goals lie in terms of solar energy penetration, for example, or in floor-area ratio, I'm somewhat limited to a certain amount of solutions, right? And if I want to have a certain FAR, then immediately I can see, well, I might be limited in the renewable energy potential. This is exactly this height versus generation discussion we just had. And then it basically gives you other urban design parameters at the end. So the idea here is that if you're planning something from the onset, you have these parameters somewhat aligned. Second, of course, is we would like to know how we use data to better understand occupancy. I mean, right now we're talking about technology, but one big factor would be understanding how people use the city and better align our energy consumption to the usage of buildings and cities. And it just, as a quick input to that, also in terms of new methods. So when we think about how we calculate energy in buildings, we often rely on these very standard schedules. Every one of you that does building energy simulation puts in a certain schedule. And this schedule basically shows you up at a certain amount of time. There is, so this gray line, for example, a certain amount of time, there is X% of people I would say idealized people are in this space, 90%, 100%, especially this is for example, I think it's a restaurant schedule that has kind of 2 peaks, lunch peaks, and then the afternoon peaks, and you could say, well, it's always roughly 80% full on weekdays, and then on Friday, on Saturday, everyone goes to a restaurant, it's 90%. And this is how we simulate buildings. This is how we estimate building energy consumption typically. And part of our research in the last Future Cities Lab was getting a better idea how people actually use buildings at the end. And of course, one promising way to do that is use new data sources, and this is, I think, somewhat representative of a lot of new techniques that are currently arising of using data sources that give us a better understanding of certain patterns behind. In this case, this was a second PhD in this project that looked in location-based service data. We all leave traces, right? You all, when you go somewhere, maybe to IKEA or your restaurant, you very often use these popular times where you see, oh, it's actually pretty full in this afternoon. And you can harness this, and this is what Gabriel Hapler did in his PhD then, is to take a downtown core and take data, basically draw data through an API from a lot of those locations. And we focused there on restaurants, primarily, and on commercial buildings. And he draw this basically a huge data set from this, and he was able then to relate the actual usage of buildings to these data sources. And this is basically what you see down here. This is when you take this two data sets of downtown Las Vegas and of Houston, exemplary. You can see that the actual usages of those buildings based on the data he captured is actually very different. And you can see it's not only different as compared to the standard schedule, it's also different compared to the different cities. In this case, Las Vegas and Houston, you have a very different usage patterns and different peaks then at the very end. So it basically shows buildings in these areas are used in a different way, or these locations are used in a very different way. And then what is quite interesting to see from that is that it's not only between different buildings, it's also between different cities, as you can see here, as we ever seen in the previous one. So you can see a distinct difference if you compare the cities among each other. And even if you compare certain weekdays, we think that weekdays are the same, Monday and Friday. You can see that even within certain weekdays, there's a huge deviation of how buildings are actually used and how energy is consumed then in buildings. And that allows you to better predict and to better simulate how the energy consumption would look like. It allows you to design systems in a more efficient way, because essentially you're carving off peak loads at the very end. And it helps you at the end to design more efficient overall systems. It's just as a quick. This is maybe. It worked. Okay. Then connecting to that, this also I gave a very quick input on this yesterday. This is the work from my colleagues, Markus Schlepfer and Francis Lee, that in our module are trying to connect the generation, BIPV generation, so building related photovoltaic production with public transport. And what they did is they looked at, again, the mobile phone data, a couple of million trips, and from this they generated certain trip profiles within Singapore, and had basically a certain trajectory, so someone would move around the city based on this data, and it has of course different locations. The car is parked somewhere overnight, then he goes to some places. The car is somewhat idle, and in these different phases you could, for example, decharge and charge the car in a different way. So if you would have solar energy at this point in time, then it could be used with charging the battery and the electric vehicle. And then at some point when you, for example, arrive at a certain location, you would decharge this then at the very end. Of course, again, also here, there's a lot of assumptions behind. We actually don't know how many electric vehicles are there in Singapore, so there was an assumption that 3% of the mobiles, the vehicles would be equipped with electric vehicles, and of course, there's also a certain assumptions if there would be charging stations and so photovoltaic generation at the end. But what is interesting is that if you use this as kind of a spatial temporal storage that then gets shifted around in Singapore, you can see obviously there's areas that benefit. A certain amount of electricity could be supplied from this electricity that is stored and carried in this battery. Of course, especially then when you need it in the evening and a lot of people are in the CBD, then you have a higher share. Other areas have a lesser share. So this actually can turn into an interesting energy source. And at the end, there was whole Singapore was distributed, I think, into 50 plus planning areas. And you can see that the local coverage of some of those planning areas in peaks was somewhat between 10 and 20%. So I think an interesting contribution to the electricity consumption through solar. And one way how to have this type of synergies. One way how to utilize what is already existing, for example, electric vehicles, and better utilizing infrastructure and resources such as solar PV. This was just the whole solar simulation for Singapore, just attached to that. Then an example from Switzerland, this, and then I have one more example from Mumbai, from India, and then I think we're through with this type. But let's now think, let's scale up a little bit. Let's think how we would go from a simple district to entire country, in a sense. And Switzerland is a small country, but it's maybe a little bit more, has a little bit more surface area than Singapore, and it doesn't only consist of cities, it also has agglomerations as well as rural areas. And the question here in this whole project, together with actually a quite large consortium, was, okay, how would Switzerland develop, how would the energy consumption develop, and what would be energy technologies to respond to that? And our task in this was thinking what typical settlements in Switzerland, how they would develop, right? And from this, extrapolate on how the entire country would develop. So I want to introduce to you this idea of an archetype, which we also use for the building modeling as such. Archetypes are basically representative placeholders of certain situations. So an archetype building would be representative of a lot of buildings in a certain area, as well as an archetype as a district would be representative for a lot of districts in Switzerland. And then, of course, this is derived from statistics, where you then see, okay, this is somewhat representative, but it helps you to extrapolate because, of course, you don't have knowledge about all buildings in all districts, so it helps you to somewhat simplify these type of systems. And we used 3 different archetypes. This is the urban archetype. This is the city of Zurich, Altstetten, which is a part of Zurich, which is typical for a Swiss high-density settlement. Then we have the suburban, all the stuff that happens a little bit outside of the city, which has a very different granularity. Then we have the rural, where we use more like a village archetype that is somewhat more in a different location, and of course much smaller than that. With all those 3 communities, we interacted. So we reached out to the planning entities, and it was very interesting that, of course, city has a huge planning department. There's, 120 people. Agglomeration, it gets already a bit smaller, then there might be 1 person representative. And in a village, there's no one. So basically the mayor, right? The mayor is also the urban planner behind that. So that's already a qualitative difference. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, why is it that the suburban has 1,000 buildings, 1,050 buildings, but the rural has 1,400? So there's more buildings than the country?
Yes. It's a question of density. So it's just, this is still quite dense in a sense. This is very scattered. So, I mean, 1,400 buildings is also stables and agricultural buildings, so it's a lot of different things. This is mainly then categories from commercial, office, and residential, and here there's a lot of agriculture. So it's a little misleading, because it's not the same buildings as these buildings in a sense, yeah. But you're right, that's a good question, yeah. So, and this is also including a certain strategy, how we can think about those futures. And all of you probably have worked in certain scenarios. There's different scenario techniques. And in this sense, we built a scenario together with those communities, which are represented here. And the first was on urban development. There's, of course, extrapolations, how these communities would develop. As you can see here, we carved out 3 different scenarios when talking to the stakeholders. Business as usual, so just as we flow right now, right? Polycentric urban networks, that's the idea that you don't have one big city anymore, but you have a network of cities, and all around those networks centers, there's something kind of a little city or a connected city arising. And this was in the height of COVID, so digitalization, the question of home office, and more people would stay at home, there would be less transport and travel. This was then a 3rd scenario. Then, of course, Switzerland is a lot about building retrofit. 80% of the buildings in Switzerland are older than 40 years. So the building stock is actually there already. So we need to think, how would we transform that? How would this be retrofitted? What would be a successful strategy, for example? What would be kind of rebound effects, unintended consequences? I give you an example. If I extremely insulate a building, then I have higher cooling demand because I'm losing also less heat, and then I have the risk of overheating at some point. A take back or failure, these are then measures that actually don't have the amount of retrofit that is intended. Then climates, of course, RCPs, you probably know, relative concentration pathways. This is what the IPCC calculates how the climate will develop. 2.6 is kind of the standard, 8.5 is the extreme. Years, of course, we want to look at things over time, so 2020, 40, and 60. And that basically gives you a huge array of different variations, right? You have a huge set of those scenarios on those different archetypes, and these were all calculated using the City Energy Analyst. So you crunch basically a lot of different scenarios using high performance computing, and at the end you get a lot of data that you can then analyze from that. It shows you how you can use these type of tool sets to build up scenarios, and there's not the one way of making an ideal scenario, but every one of you basically does probably those scenario evaluations, and this is one way how you can do it. You can combine different parameters in your scenario, and at the end you end up with an array of models, and then it's actually not about the number at the end, but it's more understanding how trends and tendencies then work. And of course, this is then when you basically parameterize this, this scenario. In this sense, for example, for the urban scenario, you expect higher population growth. You expect an occupant density, a lower occupant density, the building use ratio, so which type of building usages are included, how much more population, all these different things. So you parameterize your different scenarios, and then you end up with typical distributions according to the scenarios. So for example, the building stock on an urban scenario, how it would essentially develop. So there's not much development in the urban archetype, mainly because the urban areas are quite restricted in growth, right? It's more like an interchanging, but you can see there is a development in population that is estimated. The suburban, on the other hand, has quite an interesting development, so dependent on the scenarios, there is a different share of use types. You can see the polycentric urban network all of a sudden has a huge part of commercial, which makes sense because you're trying to build these networks with different usages, and then the rural has only in the digitalization scenario a higher share because you all of a sudden become, you have more secondary residence because people do home office and these type of things. So why do you do this at the end? To kind of estimate how should a future energy system look like, what would be the energy consumption of that. Of course, Switzerland is still heating dominated, even though we have an increasing amount of cooling. We see the heating still being more dominant, but we see in the urban scenario, depending on which climate scenario and which urban development scenario we take, is being diminished. So you're actually going down in your heating energy. That would be kind of expected. What is interesting then in the suburban, that depending on scenario, you actually experience a growth in heating energy consumption, which the people we're involved, they wouldn't expect. They would have also expected that heating energy is being diminished. And this, of course, has to do with the change in use types. You have more commercial, you have more office in the suburban use types, which then also increases the total amount of energy, not the relative. You can see then here on the relative end that the relative consumption is actually stagnant, but the absolute is then increasing, and the rural, of course, as you would expect, is diminishing. And you see a similar trend for the cooling energy demand. However, there it's uniform in the sense that all archetypes develop a difference in cooling demand, but then it's, of course, very, very dependent on which scenario you're actually looking at. If this is dramatically increasing or just increasing. This we've done roughly 2 or 3 years ago. Now there's a new study in Nature that actually shows that climate change has the hugest impact on Switzerland. Funny enough, Switzerland is one of the countries that is most impacted by climate change in a relative growth of cooling energy consumption, because there's no cooling yet, and there will be a lot of cooling most likely in the future. And this is somewhat also depicted in this calculation, where you see you have quite a heavy increase, a rise of cooling energy demand. But it's very, very sensitive to the urban development of Switzerland then at the end. So this gives, as we hope, then policymakers some better understanding, some means of control, how to balance this out, also how to plan energy systems then at the end, so to support decision making along the way. Then the final case study, which now looks more into this process. So when working with municipalities, we had a first idea how this could look like, but we were always on site. It was easy to go to Altstetten to talk to people and say, you should do this and that, use our tools. We did the whole modeling, but with Navi Mumbai, that wasn't possible, but we had collaborators, and so the idea came, and I would be interested about your feedback if that's a good way of doing it. The question was, how do we scale this up? How would people use this without us sitting right next to it, right? And in this situation, Navi Mumbai, we had a chance to do so. It was initiated by my colleague Chirag Deb, who is an assistant professor at IIT in Mumbai, and that gave us an opportunity to really use them as change agents, so them to talk to local municipalities, them to do the modeling from scratch. They basically started at zero, but they were interested and motivated, and they had the contacts, right? So the hypothesis is behind, we could take this to any place on this planet, these type of tool sets, if we would have these type of change agents. If we would have people on site that would be willing and capable of working with local communities to bring forth change through this type of analytics. So the case was really interesting for us. As you can see, Navi Mumbai is the most dynamic growing part of Mumbai, with a lot of construction ongoing, a lot of population growth. Also, carbon intensity of this state where Navi Mumbai is enormous, right? 750 grams CO2 per kilowatt hour. That's 6 times Switzerland, more or less. And the aim was here, okay, well, if there would be some way of influencing this construction process in the future by these type of tool sets, we could actually have a reduction in carbon content quite dramatically, because the grid is actually quite heavily in terms of emissions. We had the city and the Industrial Deployment Corporation of Maharashtra, SIDCO, and we had our local team from my colleague and his students, master students basically, and we were somewhat remote. And then they selected an area in Navi Mumbai where there was a new development, a new district. And this area was then the planning area where we tried to execute this then at the end. So, and this was the whole idea. I tried to make a diagram. It's not a really good diagram, but at least supposed to show a little bit how this could work. So there is this type of tool. There might be someone that supports this from the very back end, and there might be another entity that does this locally and uses these type of tool sets. This unit is then in contact with the municipality, consults them, supports them, engages with them. The local community feeds back, and this was actually done in this process, to the state level department, where they had some negotiations and feedback, not always successful because there was not a lot of bridges. Basically, there's this chicken and egg thing again, right? Municipality said, yeah, but we cannot do anything because the state is regulating this, and the state actually didn't know anything about the municipalities. It was actually really hard to gain traction here. But of course, our hope was that then the local authorities and municipality would engage construction stakeholders on site to actually change the way how they build by regulations, by incentives, all this political process. So one thing, and you will see this when I run you through City Energy Analyst, one important thing to start off with anything of that is the inputs. How do you know what you're actually modeling, right? You have to have some kind of input data for this. And we just compared in this process, this was kind of our remote task, we compared the data sources. Unfortunately, it's really hard to see for you. I hope you can see a little bit. This was Navi Mumbai, and this was Switzerland. So it starts with the urban database, some information that helps you to build the model. And we always came from Switzerland, where we say, okay, a lot of this stuff is actually government owned and is available, right? There's a lot of data, for example, in geometry and building use and age. And if we don't have this from the government, we can take it from open sources like OpenStreetMap. So the input data part in Switzerland was really good. Here it became increasingly fragmented, so a big part of modeling this was searching for input data. There was some from the government, there was some from private, there was some from studies, there was of course OpenStreetMap still, there was some publicly available data, but it became much more challenging to actually put this data together. And at the end, there were really simple things that we didn't find out. the most absurd thing was there was no information of how high the buildings were. Right? There was no information about the height of buildings. So at the end, we had to really look at aerial images and find out. And of course, if we would do this more professionally, we would read this out through learning, machine learning, for example. You could do this, or you would fly some drones. But we didn't at that point, so we had students actually looking at building heights to model this type of building. So this is the urban database, and then the construction database. The second granularity, the second level of input you need is on the building, how it's basically manufactured. And of course, in Switzerland, that's everything is very much detailed. There's a lot of databases you can tap onto. And again, the similar situation in the India context, we had to assemble a lot of this data from very different sources, and there was very little data actually from the ground. And they already see a limitation of these type of techniques and tools, right? Input data you need, and sometimes not so easy to actually obtain. And then you have to work with placeholders or with archetypes again. That can then, of course, influence and impact your results at the end. So what they were then able to do, nevertheless, in roughly 10 weeks at the end, is to take this area and do some energy benchmarking, kind of showing where the energy performance lies for the different building types that are actually in place. Here, then also showing what you could actually achieve by renewables, how much you would actually be able to implement and thus then to reduce, and how this would look from a kind of a cost efficiency perspective, as well as thinking about future climates here, cooling demand, for example, again, this RCP scenario, so looking at how this would develop. That gives stakeholders an idea about infrastructures, and then also thinking, well, if I would plan a district cooling system, for example, how would this infrastructure look like? And it was very interesting that those students with zero knowledge in 10 weeks, they were able to put down this analysis from searching the data, running the model, and then engaging with the local stakeholders and with the local government. But then, of course, it was interesting that not everyone's excited when they get this type of data, right? So this is maybe a drawback from this. So we got then stuck in the process that we were not able to really gain traction with the local government. They were always pointing at the state, and yeah, we kind of got in a difficult loop there, which showed then to make this, put this into action, there would have been more time interacting with the local municipalities, and of course that could have been done. We just had, typical as researchers, funding for those 3 months, and this is the time we could spend. But essentially, it showed that it is a process that is replicable. So we've learned from this, and what we're doing right now, we're doing a similar thing with Brazil. So we have a state of Brazil which is very committed to reducing the carbon footprint of the cities in this state. And we have, again, a local researcher that with her students, she will work on modeling and simulating and interacting with local municipalities. So we're trying this now. We thought this might be an interesting model to replicate. Right? Also because it helps us to, we can just support the modeling end, and then people that really know local municipalities could do this differently. So that's one approach of upscale, and for Navi Mumbai, I think at the end the process was successful, but it shows you also you need a long breath, you need a good stamina to actually get this then into political decision making. All right, takeaways. So we believe that these type of models can make a contribution by adding analytics to actually improve decision making. We think there are certain parameters that help doing that, usability, low barriers, but first and foremost understanding stakeholder processes, and it's impossible for us to understand every stakeholder processes, so we need people working in those specific contexts. And we like this idea of local change agents. This is what we're trying to promote, and I will show you later some examples from other cities globally that are trying now to do the same with City Energy Analyst. The urban data source is going to be very interesting, and we've seen a lot of presentations yesterday also at the Congress. I think there's huge potential to harness much more of that. But at the end, it's really giving some means of understanding these interconnections and interrelations to shape these decisions at the end, what we hope for. Okay, well, that's just a big thanks to the team that was involved, Singapore and Zurich, in all of those projects to a certain degree, and also my collaborators here in Singapore that also help to work with us in the current project. All right, so as promised, I would like you to help me a little bit with research. There's a Google form, it's like 12 questions that I would like you to answer. It's not very challenging, it's just your feedback on this, basically. And then if we go, maybe give us 10 minutes and everyone can grab a coffee and then we can do this as a little interactive break. And if, of course, what you want to share, if you want to share this, you don't have to log in, you don't have to give any credentials, you don't have to do anything. You could technically also do this form 5 times, but please just do it once. But it would be interesting. And let's, yeah, maybe spend the next 10 minutes, grab a coffee, and then we'll do the next thing. Thanks again for answering the survey. In any way, if you have questions about anything, just feel free to approach me or throw this in. Just quickly share the survey with you. So on the background, let me see, can I enlarge this a little bit? How does that work? Oh yeah, here we go. So good spread, 50% from agencies and then consultants and, oh no, sorry, the other way, for 1/4. Quite some researchers involved, so a good distribution, I would say. And also people working with quite a variety of tool sets, most of them working with GIS. This is what I would have expected because you're mostly working with urban. And then probably Anders has added all the ones. My colleague from the SEC added all this, but it's interesting that, for example, even 3D and BIM tools are also more spread. The advantages, that's quite well distributed. Most people would state informed decision making as being one of the advantages, and the second one, the interdependencies. So the claim I made at the beginning, at least you seem to agree to that to a certain degree. What are the limits? Yes, skills and knowledge. That's, I think, the biggest barrier, that it still requires a certain degree of knowledge to actually do that. Input data, you don't seem it's so critical. That's very good to hear. No place in the current design and planning process. That's still acknowledged, but doesn't seem to be dominant. Complicated process with results, yep. Yeah. That's fair enough. Okay, yep, limitations, that's what we're trying to address with the cloud version that we have. Would your organization apply UBIM? Yes, by myself, that wouldn't only be a certain fraction, but someone in the organization would do that, or would engage researchers. That's great to hear. So researchers are still in demand. I didn't ask for that reason, but it seems like a few of you agree to this model that researchers could play a role as kind of local change agents, and I think that's good to hear. How much confidence? Well, that's higher than I would expect it. So a lot of you feel quite confident on the available input data. I think this is also because Singapore, as Switzerland, is a pretty data-rich environment. About the results, also a high degree of confidence. That's very good to see. So 5 or 6, 70%. Well, we have a small number, but so that might skew a little bit. But in general, you feel confident, and then of course, I would expect that visualization is essential. Some of you think not that much, but the majority thinks quite a bit. Would you support decisions and policies based on these type of models? The majority of you seem to be confident that this can be helpful for decision making and for developing policies. That's very interesting. The vast majority. Now, what is missing? If you would need to add something, urban heat island. Yeah, that's a big topic. I can address that also in a minute in context. The friendliness and the light quick model, especially the quick model, there's always this very interesting trade-off. What is the minimum amount of knowledge of a domain you need to have to make meaningful results? And if you go all the way down, the risk is that your model becomes too simplified. You're actually not capturing certain effects. But of course, if you make it overly complicated, that's also not helpful. Scenario planning is actually in the City Energy Analyst. I will show that in a minute. Rapid assessments for, yep. I think just as a comment to that, or to those two, I think more data-driven methods can help us here. However, they're only assessing, of course, the existing. Not sure at the moment. IS is clunky, I agree. Revit does not provide enough detail also. Behavior patterns, good point, yeah. District energy and cooling, easy setup of HVAC systems. Yes, everyone that does building energy modeling knows how painful that is. And some still need to find an opinion on that. But thank you very much for your feedback. I think that's cool. Thank you very much, very helpful. And now we would go to the second part where I would dig a little bit deeper into modeling. I will cut short the modeling background stuff because from your initial survey at the very beginning, what you would be most interested in, where is it? There is it. This didn't get too many points, so I won't go too much into details in that. But I will introduce the tool set and maybe then some things I explain a little bit better. Oh, sorry, this is not yet. Okay, so some of the questions you raised have to do with how we actually build models, and I think that's maybe a worthwhile input, also to kind of understand this type of tool set that I'm going to present. There's some modeling aspects for policy support that we need to consider. And there's some general principles about modeling, and I think it's worthwhile sharing this with you, because one nice outcome of this would be a joint understanding how modeling actually works. And I mean, we all use models of some sorts. Does anyone have a definition what a model is? What is a model? How would you define a model? A cardboard model, a computer model? Not a model person, but something. How would you define that? What is the easiest definition of a model? Yep, a simplification of reality. And that's a very important point. It's always a simplification, right? It's never reality. So some people mistake models with reality, but it's a very, very important point that it's just a simplification, right? If you think of a cardboard model, that's a simplification of the building you're trying to build, right, at the very end. It's not the building, it's a simplification. So every model that you build will always be a simplification. I think that's the first thing. Second is this famous quote. Someone mentioned it also yesterday. Everyone in the modeling domain loves it. All models are wrong, but some are useful. And that relates to the fact that this simplification always means you're leaving out things, right? You're always not considering something. So you can say, it's fair to say, everyone, your model is wrong. Because it will be, most certainly it will be, right? But they can be useful, and I think that's important. All the models that we build are supposed to answer specific questions. So also discussion we just had, the question, okay, could I also model this? Could I also model different things? There will never be a model that allows us to capture every aspect, so there will always be models that answer specific questions, at least from a good practice. This is important. So simplified representation. This is important. Modeling means making choices and using assumptions. We actually know very little about the world around us, right? We don't even know what the U value of this carpet is or what the G value of this glass. We know very little, so we constantly make assumptions. We always assume something. It's an educated guess. It's our best guess. And we have to make choices. For example, if I would model this room, what should I choose to represent this room? Should I choose the walls? Should I choose the amount of people? Should I choose the lighting that is installed? So there will always be these choices and assumptions. And connected to this is, and this is, for example, where we always get stuck with the students, right? There's an inert belief that the more detailed the model is, the better a model is. But that's actually not the case, right? So a good example on urban modeling is then if you have a rough model and you're so excited, it gives you some numbers, then you start implementing the trees and the vegetation, and you think, wow, the trees, but wouldn't it be nice to actually know the leaf size of that? But to the leaf size, I would like to know evapotranspiration, so I wouldn't need to model the water flow in those leaves, and then I would need to model the nutrients. And so you see where this goes. You can always be more specific, but then at the end you actually realize it doesn't help you in the quality of an answer. So this is very important. More detail doesn't mean a better model. If someone tells you, I'm modeling all this in my model, then it doesn't mean it's a better model at the very end. Garbage in, garbage out, very important. If your input data sucks, your results will suck, and that's related to this input data question I mentioned. So if you have no data, then it's very likely that you will also get no results. Openness is essential. That's what we believe. Don't trust, as a researcher can say, I don't trust a proprietary model because I can't look into it. So this is why the CT Energy Analyst is an open source tool. Every one of you could go into the lowest level of code to actually look what is calculated and computed. This, I think, at least if we talk about spending public money and if we talk about public decision making, everyone should be able to look into this model and be sure that all of those assumptions and choices are something that align with it, right? I think that's a very essential paradigm. Yep, model data and results need to be transparent. Okay, I think this I can go faster to build a model because you most likely won't build a model, although a few have said they do their own tools. But of course, it starts with a question. So what is the motivation? What is the reason for this model? Which question do I want to answer with this? For urban systems, it's extremely important to talk about systems boundaries. What do I include in my model, for example, right? There was a discussion now about urban heat island. Yes, it would be great if our model would actually capture heat built up, but that's outside of a system's boundaries, for example. And Anders, for example, in Cooling Singapore, they're trying to build a huge, huge model that incorporates a lot of things, and then stuff gets exponentially complicated. But this is a very, very important question, right? So, for example, if you look at life cycle carbon, do you include the transport? Do you include the recycling? Do you include everything of the afterlife? And you can almost say, whenever you see some kind of model and some results, you can always question at first the boundary conditions and the boundaries that have been set. They will tell you a lot about how good this model is. There's this nice paradigm, one level up, one level down. So if you want to model a building, you should have the one level below. So for example, the building components, building walls, HVAC systems, and one level up, you want to know where this building is situated in, so the district, because there's a lot of infrastructure and all these different things. It's a good paradigm. Model formalism, I don't go into detail. There's a lot of different mathematical, so computer models are essentially just mathematical descriptions of this reality. We're not using cardboard, we're using mathematics. There's different choices you can do, statistical, bottom up. So, for example, the model I will show you is a simplified physical model. It's trying to capture the physics of something in simplified mathematical terms, basically, right? And this is one way of modeling cities. You say, well, the city is a physical system, so let's model the physics. And because it's, yeah, we have to simplify this humongously, right, to actually be able to do that. I could also use a different way, right? You see all this data-driven modeling stuff you've seen yesterday. That's the opposite approach, statistical modeling. You're taking large data sources and you try to bring it down. And each of those techniques has their advantages and disadvantages. And it's very important. It totally relates to this initial question, why building this model, which type of model you actually choose. So don't trust anyone that says, yeah, I can do everything with data-driven, and data-driven is the future. That's as true as if I would say physical modeling is the future, right? It's just a tool in our toolbox, which becomes more likely because we have more data for that. Yep.
Question.
Oh, sorry.
You know, on the in your poll, right? I think there was quite a bit of responses with regards to, okay, you know, it should be quick so that you can check how it shifts the needle. You know, too clunky, you know, but not, you know, too rough of a model.
Yep.
Could you comment a little bit on your take on what's the sweet spot? Is there even a sweet spot? Because you know, obviously, part of being quick also would like accuracy, right? And you know, to make sure that the model is validated, the assumptions are kind of right. But that also changes with time and needs to be updated. How can we balance the tension of, you know, quick, easy, fast versus real truth?
Truth we will never get. No, that's the holy grail. I mean, that's basically where all researchers spend their entire life on thinking about the sweet spot. So I mean, the easy answer is it's the simplest model that describes the behavior of the system you're observing. The simplest form that allows you to have a realistic simplification of this behavior, right? So obviously it depends very much on the question. There will be some comments also about validation. So truth, in a sense, we will never obtain, but we will able to validify if the model actually projects the system that we're interested in a good way. And I'm personally a fan of making it as simple as possible to depict the system tendencies. So about detail, the more longer I do this, the more skeptical I get about detail. Why? Because we did a lot of research where we went increasingly into detail. And that was, I mean, we could have thought about this about the beginning. So for example, in cities, let's assume you model one aspect of a building in very high detail. For example, how it responds to renewable energy generation or even the occupant behavior. Now, then you model 1,000 buildings. And then you see that all this detail actually levels out. And you become something that it's not represented in the aggregation of the individual models, which tells you, okay, for a larger quantity of buildings, I could actually simplify quite a bit without going too much into detail. So it's a good answer, and that directly links to the second part that you also mentioned, the question of verification and validation. So how do I find out if the model actually depicts the system I'm observing? And that in cities is unfortunately pretty difficult, right? Because there is no city that is completely measured through. Buildings, that works. Buildings you can calibrate with building operational data, and it takes a long time. We did this in our living lab here in Singapore. It took 8 months to calibrate the model. But a city is not measured in sufficient resolution that you can actually do that. You can validate certain aspects. So for example, our model CA, we had data from the NTU EcoCampus on 100 buildings of energy consumption. And that gave us at least some idea if we were on the ballpark, but we got this data aggregated on a monthly basis. So it's the energy consumption of building X for a month. Our model calculates in hours, right? So they can see, well, at least from the aggregation, we are kind of in the ballpark, but better data would be if you would get hourly data to actually be able to verify, does the curve actually match what you can see there? So
Because then the last part would be, the part that I think a lot of the audience wished, right, which is how do you support decision making?
Mm-hmm.
But that in itself kind of touches on that whole holy grail on, when is it that something is good enough, and how much of it actually requires a constant capability to update, to refresh, to test the assumptions again with time.
No, it does, yeah. I mean, there's different ways of doing that, and this is actually on the next slide. Sometimes what you can do is verify and validify a model from past data that you might have, right? So let's assume you have a state of a system where you have all this data, then you can use this for verification. Unfortunately, also, if in the past we don't have measured cities, there's no way of doing that. There is, of course, so what we do as a second level of verification is we compare parts of our modeling with verified tools. For example, the energy simulation we can verify through Energy Plus, which has been verified through 300 buildings. So you can do this kind of indirect verification of your model. But most likely, and that's for our scale, that's the possible thing to do, is we can use expert opinions and really talk to humans how you could potentially do that. And if you see the same trends you would expect, and everyone hopes that they uncover really funky things in models, but as a modeler, you actually don't want this. You actually want to, this is exactly what I expected. Because that at least, if someone would say it, if you said it yourself, that might be a certain bias. But if you go to an expert, for example, someone that does 15 years of energy planning of district heating systems, and you show him the result of your district heating simulation, of your model, and he says, yeah, that sounds about right, then you at least have an expert opinion on that. But there was another suggestion.
Yeah, but I think the answer is actually ultimately what kind of decision you also want to make. And if you build a model from wanting to have a quick grasp of what it does, you can keep it simple and with sensitivity analysis see which parameters really matter. And if these result into very large deviations of the outcome, you know you need to step deeper into that.
Or at least you need to be very careful about certain parameters, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If you really want to nail it down, you can use different models altogether at the same time. Because a physics-based model and a data-driven model, trying to resolve the same thing. And then if you have measurements also, you actually have three ways of getting to an answer.
Yeah.
And that will, mathematically speaking, give you higher accuracy.
Yeah. Well, if they somewhat align, yeah. But that's another important point about data-driven. And I mean, as you know, all these techniques that you see, they're based on data of the existing. Now, we're all in the planning domain. We'd like to think about the future. But the future is not part of the data you're actually looking at, not necessarily, right? So if you, for example, develop a purely data-driven model of something and you think about a system that has a different future state, which is not captured in your training data, your model will not yield any results. So I think that's also the interesting part, and it depends on what we're trying to find out, if this type of model is better than the other type of model. Yeah.
So like here in Singapore, a lot of the urban planning, even of all the different planning districts, where I've observed over more than a decade, they've relied on the geospatial information, GIS data, when they're planning in every master plan exercise. Then even more, like last 5 or 6 years, I noticed that there's more advertising to rely on the physics-based type of models and simulations, to make sure that the cast shadow doesn't, when you put up a new building and so on. I'm wondering if the way that we use models, I mean, data-driven has become core, I think, in topics of urban planning. And I wonder, is there a way to create models that can incorporate both the quantifiable data as well as the qualifiable data, which is very important for a planner's role?
It's probably going to be the future that it will be a combination of both. So there is a trend to, I mean, the point about data-driven models is you actually don't understand what is happening there. So for models where you don't know the system, you don't really know what you as a planner has as active measures, for example. You only know that a certain input data gives you a certain output data. So there's this whole trend of explainable AI, basically where you try to implement steps to learn how an algorithm is actually taking decisions, at least to then understand what is happening. But most likely, and we see this in other domains, for example, in building controls, it's a combination of physics-based and data-driven, where you say, okay, some parts of your model are actually really better off just data-driven, and I understand what is happening here, but I don't need the exact mapping from input to output. And for some parts, I need to understand the physics behind. So my projection would be that we see in the future, we see a merger of these techniques. Because as you said, some things you really need to understand, especially if you think about the new. Like in giving you an example, we had a project where we measured 10 single-family houses in Switzerland, and we were able, from this sensor data, 15 sensors distributed, and from this data we were able to do an extremely accurate energy model of each building, right? So basically we had the energetic behavior of this building with a very, very high confidence. But as soon as we want to think about retrofits and changing something in the building, the models, of course, didn't perform at all because it was not in the training data set. So the only way of doing that was actually re-implementing physics processes where we say, well, we actually need to know how heat is transferred from A to B. We need to know about thermal storage, thermal inertia. So that's an example where looking at the past doesn't help you to think about the future if things change quite dramatically. So yeah, I think it will go to in this combination, but you mentioned the point. But essentially what we all hope, what I also hope, is that using all these type of models gives you an intuition. So my hope would be for everyone that does that, my dream would be, let's assume you're a planner, you use 5 years, you use those models, and you know exactly what the outcome will be because you have developed this intuition. So I'm not interested in models actually, I'm interested in the type of intuition you could develop using these type of models. So I see this, this is the most important part for me. So to your question, a model should be so simple and so performing that you can develop an intuition by using it over and over and over again. Okay, input data, we talked about this already. Input data selection, yes, of course, you need to make a choice. You need to parameterize then in a certain way. This is what you mentioned, input uncertainty, right? Sensitivity, understanding which parameter changes a lot in your results. I think every modeler should do uncertainty analysis and sensitivity analysis as a default to understand the weight of your parameters then at the end. I like also this, there are no knowns, unknown knowns, and unknown unknowns, right? You probably heard this before. Because this shows that we have a total blind spot. We know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know, right? So, and that we always have to be very thoughtful of this, that there might be something we completely not see in our model, right?
Oh, sorry. Can I just ask
Yeah,
a question?
sorry. Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. Here we go.
Maybe just your personal opinion or personal view, I guess.
Yeah.
Between the unknown knowns versus the unknown unknowns. which will you be more concerned about with relate to like, decarbonization?
Which one? So it also depends on the system that you're looking at. From a building context, I would say we're pretty certain on the unknown knowns, I would say. The unknown unknowns is always what we hope for. So at least to uncover this and see some effects in the models that we haven't projected yet. But I think for what we're trying to model, we are pretty solid, I would say. There's one area, everything that is stochastic nature and chaotic nature, human behavior, climatic models, all those things are much harder. But you would think, but if you look for a building energy simulation, the uncertainty you have, for example, of building properties actually then makes the biggest difference, right? So not knowing what this facade is made of. So we definitely know what we don't know, but we always hope that we find something that is the unknown unknown and that becomes a known unknown, at least, right?
It's a challenging one because in buildings the lifespan is pretty long. Right? So especially if you look at the current building stock, I believe it's 80% of what is built today or that is existing today still exists in 2030 or 2050. And yet we have this decarbonization target. So if we look at the existing buildings and now having district cooling systems as something sort of newly implemented, how do you do that in the current built environment? Similarly, what we build now, there could be systems in place in the future that we don't know yet. And yet, do we cater for them in the future? Do we make space for them in the future that they can be implemented?
Best example, unknown unknowns, is future technology. We have no idea if there will be the green slime for Mars that will solve all our energy problems. We don't know. We don't know.
But that's a positive surprise, right? So I guess that's negative surprise. So I mean, like in finance, for example, or economics, people worry about unknowns unknown because of black swans and everything else. Something will just caught us by something that we cannot anticipate. And I think we've got to, let's say, climate models and everything else, net zero. So what will give us a negative surprise? Are you concerned about that?
I think there's always these black swan events that we cannot foresee. Ukraine war, real estate crash, all this. There's no way. The only thing, and there was some talk yesterday, is about building certain resilience towards that. But we also need to, we had one PhD thesis that was looking into robustness of decision making. And we have to ask, does it even matter, right? So for example, in this thesis, my PhD student looked into retrofit decision making. How robust would which decision be under changing boundary conditions? So financial crashes, not a crash, but higher taxes, high energy prices, all this. And then you can actually see that it's only a small set of solutions that perform robustly against those interventions. So what you at least could do is do this type of analysis and see, yes, I have, from those 50 decisions I can take, 5 decisions actually perform pretty robust if I assume the worst case event. So that's the only thing you can do. But I think this is what we should do, right? Because we're investing so much money on decarbonization, every measure we should check for this robustness then. Yeah. But there will always be something we don't know, yeah, for sure. Okay. Output data, so you have a great model, and you get some output there. Validation, yes, does the model represent reality? And this is what we just discussed already. Does it match historical data? Uncertainty, we also talked about this. Variability, does it produce the same results with identical input? That's easy for a physics-based model because the inputs and outputs are very closely linked. But for example, if you have a data-driven model and you use different type of algorithms, then this might not be the same. How sensitive? Yes, to each parameter. Are parameters influencing each other? This is the kind of second order interactions that are really interesting. Do you have dependencies of certain parameters? If A happens, B changes, right? These type of interactions, super interesting. And then, of course, output analysis. That's also really funny. I already mentioned this. You can see this. So what does actually matter? What should we be looking at, right? And again, my example from yesterday, when people present a highly, highly uncertain model and it's 5 digits below the comma, right? Where you say, okay, actually, your metric might be over-specific, or it might not even be the right metric, or you cannot, there's no validity in this answer of this high precision when you have all these assumptions behind. So the metrics really matter, and how we represent the metrics. What are we looking for? Is it the absolute values? I don't think there's a lot value in absolute values so much, right? Because there's so much uncertainty. What the big value for us on an urban level is the changes, right? So the degree of change, understanding how a system behaves behind. Output visualization insight, there's this very nice paradigm, pretty is true, too much is false, right? If you look at a visualization, if it looks great, people tend to like that. I had great courses with students where the students had absolutely no idea what they were simulating. But the visuals were fantastic, and all the critics are, oh, this is a great performing building, right? I like that. And it made no sense, but it looked really cool. That doesn't happen to students, that happens to everyone. I'm not blaming anyone. Too much is false. That's what we as scientists and researchers are prone of, showing a lot of stuff, and you show this to a stakeholder and he goes, this can't be right, because you're just delivering too much information. And of course, there are certain biases involved in that. So the question is visualization appropriate to convey the key messages? I think that's also a big part. Okay. Yeah, what does it mean? And this is then the most important part for the question I have. Does it lead to actionable insights? Do I learn something that can change what I'm planning to do or influence the way that I can do? All right, so this would be on the input. Then I will give you a quick run through on, of course, I would love to say we considered all of this when we built this tool. But as it goes, a tool evolves, and it's a work of 8 years of 5 PhD theses and at least 30 master theses, so there's always things that can be improved. But we're doing our best to basically incorporate these type of parameters into CA. So, yeah, developed in Zurich and Singapore, already mentioned, that's a little older, there's one more PhD now and some more master theses, a lot of code. It's open source. Right now it has 1,200 downloads in 62 countries. This is the latest globe who is all using this tool. About the question of what does it all encompass, at some point we had a very smart software developer that built a software plugin interface. So you can actually plug in all possible plugins. We will see transportation, microclimate, energy hub analysis, all these different things. And we have a live community, so the question in research is always, how does software survive that you do? Because it's not a commercial entity, no one pays you for this, we don't get any money from anyone that is using that. How does it survive? It only survives by community, right? People that use these type of tool sets, that help to build it, and we have a great community, I would say. It's small, but very active. So you can go on the platform, just download it, install it, Mac or Windows, runs pretty stable, surprisingly stable for a research software, but this is because it has been well crafted. How does it work? And here you see a lot of things that we've discussed. The first is about scenario creation, being able to create different scenarios. You can input this in the software and basically say, okay, I'm looking at one side in different scenarios. We get a lot of data from open data. OpenStreetMap is basically implemented, and OpenStreetMap already has interesting information on the building. It's only maybe 50 to 60% true for the buildings you're looking at. It needs some careful attention. You can also import shapefiles from Rhino Grasshopper, or for example, the city of Zurich has a shapefile of all the buildings of the city. We can just load in, and then we have all the geometry of the city already. A lot of cities have these type of shapefiles. Weather files, we can use, of course, any weather file, TMY, typical meteorological year. And, of course, RCP scenarios, so future weather conditions that we have. Then the archetypes, this is pretty crucial. So what constructions, what type of systems, the type of occupancy models. This you have to do at every location where you're trying to simulate something. So if I would simulate something in Singapore, I would need to build this. Right? I need the geometry, I need weather, I need the archetypes, I need to know how a typical building in Singapore is built. right? At least some data. So for example, Switzerland has an open database, not an open, but a public database, a GWR on that. And this is the thing we're trying to speed up. So part of our current endeavor is building a platform where people can exchange input data. So for example, all those 62 countries that we have, we would be happy if people would upload their input data, because it would mean you can simulate in 62 countries already. We've done this for Switzerland. So default Switzerland and Singapore is in the CA because we've done research there. So it's all our input data already in there. But we're incentivizing people to share their input data of many other locations. Here's already the first link. It's, for example, transportation. Some of you that do transport simulation know MatSim. It's an agent-based transport simulation. It can, for example, input certain user behavior data that then can be used for occupancy models, right? From transportation, you kind of know how people flow, and you can put this in. So this is your input. Everyone has to do that. This is what the Navi Mumbai team did in scraping around this data. And when you have this, you can start computing. So you can start looking at solar radiation. You can compute how solar radiation is scattered and distributed over the different surfaces. You can engage physical models, an RC model, resistance capacitance model. This is a simplified dynamic physical model that describes the thermal behavior of a building. A building is basically some kind of storage, some barrier, some inside and outside conditions, and you can have some simplified equations for that. It's in 1 hour, and then it gives you already certain outputs: space heating, cooling demand, domestic hot water, electricity, end-use consumption, all these things. This is a basic feature, and then we're linking to another open source tool, which is called Calliope, which has Energy Hub. So where you can, an Energy Hub is where you get all the inflows of different energy sources and types, and then you can compute how would I meet this demand best by different energy types. Energy potentials, this is for us always the most interesting. Now, if I find my environment, solar radiation, geothermal, all these things, what would be the potentials for heat and electricity generation? Solar photovoltaics, photovoltaic thermal, solar thermal collectors, geothermal, sewage waste, water bodies, all these type of things. When you have all this, you can start thinking about thermal networks. So we have routines that compute automatically district cooling and district heating systems, and see if this is well performing. And then at the very end, it's about optimization. Most of you probably know the idea of optimization, finding the best set of input parameters for a certain goal, for a certain objective that you would have. For example, reducing energy consumption or reducing emissions. It's different techniques. It's not super sophisticated, but there's some genetic algorithms, for example, that can be used. And then basically it gives you a Pareto front, shows you basically the best solutions in a certain mix of input parameters for a given objective. So this is how the whole tool basically looks like. This is under the hood. This is the energy systems models. This has been a lot of work from master students and PhD students building up energy models on a district and on the building scale. So of course, we need to know how energy is generated, how it's converted, how it's stored, how it's distributed and transmitted. And we need to know this on both levels. And this then basically this is under the hood for the entire energy systems model, right? These models are, but you can imagine this as being just a simplified equation of a certain system, right? You have a certain input of energy, for example. This is the output you get, for example, in heat as a percentage. And this is often derived from existing technology. For example, a heat pump, there's a curve how a heat pump behaves at certain temperatures. So this is what's behind that. Then at some point, so CA with the longest time was just a terminal, more or less. You would just input some command lines and you would get some results. And then we implemented this into GIS, ArcGIS at some point. And then we developed our own interface. This is now the CA interface, which has this, I think it's called Electron interface, runs in any browser, and has very nice features how to visualize things. That helped a lot to get people work with the tool, visualization, good visualization, easy. So for example, if you build a new area in the city you're interested in, you just draw a map, a line over a map, and it automatically extrudes and basically grabs all the building data that is available. Okay, I think I can skip that. What is important here about the process that we talked about, we made this, we applied this becoming a digital public good, which is this concept of equity, that we all have the same chances of getting access to information and to data. And quite happy that 2 years ago it was listed, or since then it's listed in this digital public good, which means, yeah, there's access for everyone to these type of tool sets. And by this, we hope that also not as wealthy countries as Switzerland and Singapore can use these type of tool sets. Of course, we try to teach and use this. This was actually in Singapore with government agencies, students, different researchers, a course where we taught 3 days the use of this type of tool sets. We've built up an online repository, and this is ever growing by people doing little videos. You know this from other software. This is how we try to get it out. We will have a user day in Zurich, actually in November, where we will also do these courses again. Of course, trying to teach, but it's, if you do this just one-to-one, it's not multiplying so much, because you can only, you can see this is like 25 students. So we have to go to online tools and online measures, and this is constantly growing. These are examples from other cities and teams that are using this. For example, in Lisbon, very interesting, looking at new city areas. This is Vancouver, looking into decarbonization of certain areas. We had it in Amsterdam, answering questions. And of course, Singapore, Cooling Singapore is using that as a part of his huge array of tool sets. And there's other examples. There's also increasing amount of teaching that is done. We just learned that UCL is building a new master course where they will focus their modeling. So University College London will focus the modeling using CAA. We know this from Stockholm, and we're also doing this in our course now as a teaching tool. All right, let me just quickly see how much time. Ooh, wow, time has progressed. Yeah, so we're already approaching the end, but I will still give you, do you have 5 more minutes, or is everyone in a hurry? Okay, so I will just very quickly give you a look and feel on this. So this is when you basically open up. Oh, maybe first one thing, if you have a computer, you might also try it. It's like I said, you can either download it directly, or you can use the cloud version. However, I would not recommend running the simulations, and it's a little tough on a smartphone, I have to say. the interface is not so big. But anyway, I will just give you a run through on here on my machine. So basically, this is how you select a new project, a new scenario. This is now a Swiss scenario that we've modeled. And I will just open this as a base scenario. There you see how this is connected to an input data. So if you draw, for example, here I draw a line around these type of buildings, and it generated those buildings based on existing data. You can see here the reference is OpenStreetMap. So all the data it found from OpenStreetMap has been used to build this building. And then it also generated all the surrounding buildings here in light gray, because they might cast some shadows, there might be some interactions with these surrounding buildings in this. But this only gets you halfway. So if you see this building, then of course you see a range of parameters, and you of course need to check, does that really correspond to the building you're modeling in? And you see different floors above ground, below ground, all these different things, different use types. And you see, this is the whole input data stuff. So this is something we try to simplify and make a little leaner. So example, the topologies, what is actually happening in those buildings, what are use types. You see the year, you see a certain construction standard, you see how this is multi-story residential. And all those archetypes come with different parameters behind that are fortunately hidden. But then you can go, of course, into details. So if you look at construction archetypes, the question is, what is the wall actually made of, right? What is the U value? What is the G values of certain transparent components? What are certain archetypes of constructions? Then interesting is what are internal loads? What is the occupancy model behind it? So how are people using this? This is what you can specify here. Indoor comfort, what would people like, right? What is the comfort thresholds? Is it between 21 and 28? That makes a huge difference. That's a very sensitive parameter. Air conditioning system, supply system. So here you can basically define all the input data, and this is what we hope to get over this platform, that you're able to download this just with a click of a button. And for Singapore you can do this because it's already implemented in CA, and this is rather straightforward and easily done. What you still have is a whole database where you can go in infinite depths about the archetypes. Remember this idea of an archetype. Here the archetype is basically, for the Swiss, it's a certain so-called type age classification. So it shows you a certain use type and a certain age behind that. And from this, there is a certain input parameters are derived from that. You have envelope assembly, so you can choose, for example, if your envelope has a certain standard. Very often this represents like BCA standards, or in Switzerland it's SEA standards of a certain construction type. And you see, if you want to go into detail, you of course can detail this then at the very end. This is all input data that is driving the models behind. HVAC systems, for example, there's parameters behind those HVAC systems. So you see the input data plays a quite relevant role. Then there's other helpers, for example, on data management. I don't go into detail here, some mappers. And then of course you do subsequent steps, how to measure the demand, how to calculate and estimate the demand. Sorry, not measure, but estimate. Life cycle analysis, energy potentials, for example, for photovoltaic thermal potential, sewage heat, all this stuff. Networks, thermal networks, you can simulate and optimize, and then optimization, how you can optimize the entire system. So you let them run. They usually run quite fast. If you have more processors in your computer, it runs faster. If you do a lot of simulations, then you might need some additional computation power. But then, of course, what you're interested in is this dashboarding then at the end. So you can create, from all those outputs, they create a huge database on your computer. You can create certain dashboards that you're interested in. So, for example, an energy demand dashboard. This is now all the buildings in my area, deciphering the different thermal energy demands and electrical, so electric end use. So I can focus on maybe just, I would just say, okay, I want the heating demand. These are all my different buildings, or I want to have them combined, or I want to have, let me just open this up. Nope, where's the one? Anyway, you can, of course, then zoom in into a certain month, for example, where you see exactly the distribution of certain loads of different buildings, and you get a general idea of how energy demand distributes over the year on a monthly basis, or you can filter out certain demands that you're most interested in. You look at comfort, so you see how comfort is distributed given the temperature constraints you've set. Or you can look at a total end use, so aggregated energy demand for everything. Load curves, if you think about systems, so what are thermal load curves as an example? Just as an example for outputs. Solar is quite interesting because then you can start looking, well, what is most interesting? Let's just focus on the rooftops, for example, and you see, okay, well, there is the typical distribution you would have in a Zurich context, high solar generation around the summer months. But then if I start, okay, let's add the south facades, for example, or just you see in this case it's rather marginal. Oh, sorry, this was the north ones, south facades. See, this is already a little bit different, balanced. Now, if I put in south and west and east, I see that for this district it's actually amounting quite a bit. And if I switch off the rooftops, and I see, okay, well, I have interesting phenomena here around the March and so spring and fall, for example, where you have a better distribution of your solar generation, solar irradiation. This is only irradiation. So there you can use a lot of, you can visualize all this data, or then supply systems, for example. You can look on district heating. What is the district heating system that will be generated? You can look at thermal network losses. So a huge array of data you can utilize and to visualize, but you can always also just assess this as a data source. So, for example, data files behind. Let's look at this one. And this is basically, okay, there we go. This is what makes it easier to exchange also to other software. It's basically just a huge CSV data file in a very simple data format. There's no specific file format. It's just a database you're basically exporting. And here you can see for the photovoltaic potential it gives you just the return of all the generated kilowatt hours per square meter for all buildings, just over the different time steps of 1 year, 8,760 hours, and this is then the data file, and you can utilize this then for any other source accordingly. All right, so this is a very quick rundown, but given the time that we're in, I hope it gives you an idea. Let me see if I didn't save that again, did I? Okay. Anyway, so feel free to try this out and to model your own scenarios. Like I said, there's also a repository of tutorials and documentation. There's also a forum where a lot of questions are answered if you're interested in that. But yeah, essentially it comes down to this. It's a modeling workhorse where you can answer specific questions about building energy demand and emissions along those lines that I just showed. And yeah, so far it has been used quite successfully, but we're always open and interested how could this be used further. And if I would have had time, if I wouldn't have talked so much, I would have answered you this, asked you this, to go on this mirror board, which we probably won't have time for, but maybe it's something you want to share as a last thought from your end. Like I said, I wish, I wonder if there's any input from your end to wrap up the session, or at least what your thoughts are about this as a tool set. I mean, you're happy to do this if you have time. Go for it. You can just leave a comment. I spared you that you have to log into Miro because I don't think any one of you wants to do a login. So you can just, if you open this, it's basically you get this board and you can just add a comment to it. And maybe each one of you that is logged in, just a quick thought on I like, I wish, I wonder about the second part of the session, about the CA as a tool set, or what else you would have regarding to the stuff I presented. So unfortunately you cannot do the sticky notes. You would need to log in for the sticky notes and use the app, but you can use a comment. As you can see, if you touch on this one area, it leaves a comment, and I can see the comments. There you go. Comments are popping up.
So what's the password again?
Oh, sorry, it's UBEM 2023. 24, sorry. Why did I choose 24? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, 2024. I'm living in the future. Yeah. Erase my base entry here. Sorry, Jude, we're taking too much time, huh?
No, it's all right.
When's the next workshop starting?
It's at 4.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Then we should use 2 more minutes, and that at least gives you a 5-minute coffee break. Yeah. Can you all see the comments? So you can click them on your, yeah, perfect. Then you see what other people have posted. So even when you leave this room, you still can look at the comments. Yep, question? Excellent.
Now I want to
Mhm.
create
You have to give it a name, yeah?
a name. Okay, blocks. And then I want to select an area from.
Yep.
Okay.
There you go. You just draw across the map.
Put a name, the map will come up.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to, the important part is that on top where you select all the helpers. So if you scroll up again a little bit,
Okay.
there you go. So for example, on the data management tools, you click all yes, then you get the surroundings, the weather file, the terrain data, the streets. You get this all automatic, unless you have from the area that you're looking at. It also includes that from OpenStreetMap.
Where is the weather file coming from?
This is, if you're in Singapore, you get it from Singapore. If you
The historical.
It's a TMY file. Yeah, it's class TMY file. If you have a different one, you could check this little wheel, and then you could enter a weather file. You could choose a weather file.
Oh, okay. Here we can choose.
Yep, exactly.
That's cool.
There's, yeah, there you see, yeah, there's even multiple one of, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then you go on draw,
Draw. Oh, okay.
and then now you can click on the map and basically see, then it pulls a square. There you go.
Go put the square.
Yeah, you click around, you see how this then.
Okay, sorry.
You could click cancel then on the bottom.
Is there a maximum number of points?
No, not on that. No, but the more, I mean, the more buildings you have, the longer it takes to compute. So it makes sense to choose a sufficient amount of buildings. So if you take entire Singapore, it will take a long time to compute. Yeah, you've been there. All right, I think we need to wrap up. I'm very sorry. I very much appreciate. You can look at this on your smartphone. So thank you very much for your participants and your active engagement. I enjoyed that a lot. And I hope it's worthwhile for you spending your Friday with. And yeah, have a great weekend and see you again. And if you're a user, don't forget to go to our forum. If you have any questions about using, ask in the forum, all this stuff. Other than that, have a great weekend. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation.